Uh, well, an understanding of social power must begin with the recognition that social power is an outcome of the social process of interaction. It is therefore appropriate that we understand the context out of which social power emerges. And social process implicates people, values, institutions, and resources. And those, in a sense, collectively would coalesce to form some version of social power. Now, the outcomes of social process interaction generate contestations for the values that people need and the values that people want or desire. And then the question is, what are the values? A multitude of versions of values, but I want to be a little bit more explicit and say they are going to be contesting for power, for enlightenment, for wealth, for respect, for well-being, skill, affection, rectitude, and aesthetics. So the concrete values there, and they're concrete in the sense that we can point to institutional mechanisms that are more or less specialized to their realization. When we think about power, we think about government. When we think about wealth, we think about corporations. When we think about well-being, we think about clinics and hospitals, enlightenment, education, and so on and so on. And then the question is, how is it that social participants acquire values? They must have recourse to resources which will serve as bases of power in order for them to get things they want. And this really is an expression, if you like, of the most radical contextual sense of the way power pervades society. Power isn't something separate. It's implicated in every value, and every value is implicated in power. For example, you can pursue power for its own sake, but if you have power, you can use it for other purposes. You can use it to get wealth, or skill, or status, or respect, or whatever. And so, if you can keep that in mind, that the values and the instrumental ways and institutional ways we try to frame it does provide us with one of the most radically and realistically available descriptions of the role of power in society. Now, one of the things I said was that we have social interaction. We have, in that, people are claiming goods, services, honors, values, if you like. And one of the most important outcomes of a community's process of social interaction, be it global or local, national or regional, is going to be an outcome that we can identify as the process of effective power. So that every society will have stakeholders and claim holders and claim resistors about the production and the distribution of power in that universe of human beings. And so one of the important questions that we would have to answer about social power is how it differentiated, if you like, from conventional or formal power. And the only way I know to do that is to map the power process itself by the identification of the major institutions of power, and those would be at the governmental level. It would be national governmental institutions, transnational, and then non-governmental. Of course, we would have the range of political parties, pressure groups, private associations, corporations, and we could extend that much further in a negative direction, that is to say, the role of international organized crime, the role of international organized terrorism, etc. And lastly, the most important player in the game of power would be the individual, and how the individual mobilizes whatever assets he has to have access to private power. So essentially what we are saying then is that we need to make a distinction between conventional power, the one that we're familiar with, governments and so on, and functional power. How is it actually working in the larger society at large? And again, we could be much more systematic about this. We would be interested in knowing which social groupings give a priority to which values and what strategies they use or employ, and where the action is taking place, and is it taking place in a condition of normalcy or crisis? Is the target highly institutionalized or highly disorganized? All of these factors would affect the expression of social power. So yes, situations would be critical: geographic, temporal, institutionalization, crisis. Bases of power. What bases of power does any social group have to pursue the objectives that it seeks to advance? And then strategies. One of the most important things, certainly for lawyers, is what strategies does the group use to acquire power? So we can see in the context of Gandhi, he mobilized the strategies of non-violence, a strategy that implicated not only the victim, but the victimizer. That may well be an important issue, because if you can use non-violence with regard to General Smuts, who was a benignly humane guy, can you use non-violence against Stalin and Hitler? In other words, would non-violence work to transform not only the victim but the victimizer? So we would look at strategies in a multitude of ways, from violence to various forms of coercion. In the context of the struggle against apartheid, for example, one of the most important strategies deployed by the detractors of apartheid outside of governmental circles was to get the private sector to disinvest from apartheid. And from disinvestment grew the notion of economic sanctions against apartheid and so on. And then those were thought to be strategies that were far more effective than direct military strategies of violence and coercion, which might exacerbate the dynamics of the evolution of the state there. All right. So now so when we look at this, there's so many different dimensions of private power. One of the central, I think, ideas that we emerge with in the late in this century is the notion of the growth of global civil society. And we've sometimes seen global civil society as a counterpoint to the omnipotence of the national sovereign state. And the question is, how far does global civil society intrude or moderate the power of the nation state? Has global civil society, in this sense, maximized its capacity to influence the political direction of the world economy, driven, so to speak, by the sovereign states? The UN Charter is interesting in this respect, that it predicates the authority foundation of the system on we the people and not the states. And so it does create an opening, and that opening is widened when it stipulates the salience and importance of individual human rights and a whole range of other components in what its ostensible purpose is that do make sense to we the people. And so what we've seen emerging is that there are a tremendous number of forms of social power that have emerged, but we have not yet tapped and coordinated their vitality. In the intellectual community, WAS would be a form of social power, but it also has a number of collateral academic sister city organizations and so on. And for some odd reason, they recognize their power, but they also seek to express themselves in limited ways. One of the most important of these is the American Physical Association, which monitors the Congress of the United States. It lobbies for the science budget of the United States, and so it has a much more explicit political role than many of the others. I don't see the Association of Anthropologists there, or if the economists do it, they do it through commercial type lobby institutions and so on. In any event, if we did a survey of the range of professional associations, not just the academies, but the organizations of doctors, the organizations of dentists, the organizations of every other conceivable profession, then there would be actually a body of influence that can be targeted, and targeted with some strength and some expectation of success. And so the question then becomes, in the emergence of functional power in global civil society, I never was able to get a full number, but certainly for climate change action alone, there was an alliance of 300 non-profit organizations, and a similar number campaigning against the XNL pipeline, and the World Association of Non-Governmental Organizations lists a website of some 22,885 NGOs in North America alone. Again, these don't always function in a coordinated way. The question is, let me just finish it up for 1 minute, okay? And so, but when we bring this element of global concern and articulation in, we really can see that global civil and social power can have an effect on the crisis of climate change, on demographics and population, on the shift of global economic power, on the corporate form of economic organization, and even indeed the future of pandemics. We touched on the question of happiness, and some are very skeptical about that. But it might well be useful to have better indicators of human happiness. And one of these may well be the inevitability of technological innovation. Well, is that going to bring more sadness or more happiness? Does that mean that technology, if socialized, provides more leisure time, and that can be translated into the lives of ordinary people? And that means that that value that I talked about in another context, aesthetics, may well play a larger role in the leisure time that people may have, assuming we can have a much more rational concern over the distribution of technology and so on. Well, there's more in this, and I probably will ask Gary to put it on the web or something like that. But in any event, again, it's the individual human being that participates in social power, and I've made some points here about leadership in those contexts as well. And I'll just conclude with this. One of the fundamental insights into the nature of democracy is that it's meant to moderate the exercise of power by making it transparent, responsible, and accountable. And social power can facilitate this process. Contrary to socialist belief that there may be a withering away of the state and there'd be no coercion, that's never going to happen. But democracy permits us to moderate and subordinate power via the process of civil society and to promote universal respect, human rights, and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd really like to thank Winston for putting this topic on the agenda. It came out of our discussions last fall here in the same room when he raised this issue of social power. And to me, the most invaluable part of my experience at the last course was after it was over, we spent a day talking about this, and I thought it really opened up the sphere. It's really not fair to put this topic in 20 minutes because it's not possible. I'd like to build on what he said and try to present it the way I have been understanding it from our discussions, because the word social power is itself ambiguous. It has different connotations to different people, and we tend to think of the power in terms of the political power or who's really pulling the strings. But I think if we start with a more fundamental premise, society has potential for accomplishing its goals. We can call it social potential. And we know today society accomplishes much more than it ever accomplished in the past in mundane terms. Let's not talk about happiness. I'm not sure about that. But we can travel further, we can gather more communication, we can produce more, we can distribute more, we can do more things more quickly, and so forth. Out of a potential, we are having a capacity today that human beings never had before. Even Louis XIV didn't have the power that we have to do ordinary things, even to cure a toothache or a headache. So there is a generic use of the word power, and those of you who were here on the first Tuesday morning when we started and I put up my diagram on energy conversion, I talked about human accomplishment is a social process, which is what Winston is referring to and what Laswell talked about. There's a social process underlying the political process and the legal process in society. And it's a process by which human energy is released, directed, and organized or channeled in order to accomplish results. That capacity to accomplish results is social power in the most generic sense. Winston alluded to the fact that different types of social power are interconvertible. Having productive power, we also know means the U.S. became a military power because it had economic power. So economic power can convert into military power. We know because you have military power, you acquire power to influence people politically and socially, and because you're a wealthy country, there's a cultural power to it. People want to watch the movies that are produced in Hollywood or something like that. So these different types of power, of which he listed several different values, are in some sense interconvertible. Now I'd like to talk about what determines the effectiveness of that power. This is where Winston's discussions has really helped me. Because it's very clear that the fact that the society has potential or the fact that society has power doesn't ultimately determine what results it gets. It also depends on how that power is utilized and who's controlling that power. And what Winston's been focusing on is I'm using my words, he may correct me, but I'd say the way in which the distribution of power is skewed or distorted or biased by other factors. The wealthy have more influence over political decisions, for example. The more developed people have greater use of the internet so they can make the internet do what they want it to do. So one type of power skews it. So if we're looking at leadership has a determinative influence on how power is used. Am I using the power for myself, for my benefit, to keep my party in power, or am I using it for maximum benefit? If we look historically, the monarch had the maximum of authority, but the society didn't have the maximum of power. And what I've been hearing from Philip and Pierre is, in their work, they're talking about how to generate maximum power in the organization, which is not by a few individuals exercising maximum authority. Actually, it's by empowering other people, so the result you get is much greater. So these are areas which really, I feel, the Academy has a lot of work we can do on this. It's a practical value to addressing the issues we're trying to address. It's a theoretical value, but so far I think the concepts have not been clearly defined in a way we can universally use them, which makes it a little confusing. So I'm just going to conclude by putting the question, can we discuss what should leaders do to maximize the effective power of society? And I would argue that that maximum, and I think all of us would, that the maximizing that social power is based on how the power is distributed, how widely it's distributed, how fairly it's distributed, and how much we succeed in getting the power to individuals, which is why democracy, with all its failings, works better, is more productive than a monarchy or something like that. Okay, Renate, and then...
You want me to go next? Well, I would concentrate only on a few of the elements that have been raised, and I would start from the global concerns of social power, the concerns that governments, states, individuals have for the future of humanity, and what we are doing, in order to try to resolve some of these imminent threats that surround us. I mean, Winston was making reference to crisis and strategies to come out of these enormous challenges that we are confronted in our daily practice and daily life. In terms of major policy changes and policy challenges, some have been mentioned. For instance, the new Sendai framework for reduction of disaster risks and losses in lives that has just been negotiated, as was reminded before. And this also builds on livelihoods, on health, on better economic, physical, social culture, and of course, I mean, the essence is resist to the risks that are imposed on us, I mean, and try to reduce the level of the risks. There are many other important appointments that are coming up, as you know, until the end of the year and beyond. The United Nations is now well advanced in agreeing a set of sustainable development goals. And these are the successors of the Millennium Development Goals. This is also a very important new step that will be agreed just in September 2015. And then there will be the discussions on the new global change agreements in May 2016 with the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. So all these are important opportunities to exercise the social power that you were describing. Now, there is one point that for me is important, is the strategy, how we go along that. It's important, of course, to know that we have these challenges, that everybody can exercise this social power, governments can exercise this social power. But the real context in which we are operating nowadays have changed, in the sense that we have internalized, we have realized collectively that we cannot operate in a system where, when in front of crisis, imminent crisis, we operate only with responding, with the initial response that then fades down because obviously there is another crisis that comes up, etc. We have to work more in terms of, obviously, alert, in terms of preparedness, in terms of thinking ahead what solutions we have in mind, but we have to work in particular in terms of resilience, building the resilience of those who are the most vulnerable, and they need our help. So this means also building the capacities, building the social power of the local and national countries, authorities, institutions that need this support more. Another principle that stems out of this resilience approach that I think is very much connected with the social power we were describing is the respect and encouragement of local and national ownership. I mean, we cannot continue, as I said, to have this parachuting of humanitarian assistance if that ends up there and it does not help rebuilding something in place. So it's important that everything is interiorized, that comes up with an endogenous response. No? The importance of adopting flexible and integrated strategic response mechanisms. This is also an important way to go ahead. And the commitment to engage not on the short times, immediate response only, but the long term. I mean, if we don't look beyond what is the immediate challenge, we are not investing in the future. We are not really solving problems. We are not trying to make a better life for everybody. So I think these are some of the principles. There are others that I could mention. One that has been also mentioned by Winston is the importance of partnerships and multi-stakeholder cooperation. We do not work in isolation. So if we all work around these principles, we can make more sense of the social power that we all exercise. And we can also work towards this transformational change that is so required in all aspects of our society. I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. Hold on. Stop, huh?
I would like to add to the sources of social power, because the long list here is printed, but it can be legitimate legal institutional authority, extra information, money, power, stakes, etc. I would like to add moral authority. Now, how does one acquire moral authority in a society? I think it's essentially if your main energy and your potential and whatever resources or whatever, if you actually devote that to doing something for the society and not specific, just part of it or specific people, etc., I think you get the base for the moral authority. Now, that can be individual, but it can be also group or collective. And we had an interesting organization that was launched during the period, actually, when we had this terrible president, Yanukovych, in power. An organization was created called the Initiative Group of the 1st of December, not very poetic name. And its aim was spiritual, moral renaissance, if you like, or rebirth. Because seeing the devastation of the Soviet period and partly what followed after, it was actually really rebirth of spirituality. Religion is not part of spirituality, not, say, just in religious sense. Morality, which means also ethics, etc. And the group, we are only 11 people, actually. Now, the people, individual people, had some moral authority already because they're political prisoners, but they, publish some extremely sort of important things, etc. But as a group, for example, the group produced a charter of a free person. And it decided, it defined there, that a free person is the one that has no fear. Now, it had a tremendous impact on subsequent events, on Maidan, on this revolution against the decision not to join the European Union, if you like. Subsequently, also on people that actually volunteered to go and fight against Russian aggression, etc. All that because somehow this notion was accepted like it happened before in Poland, by the way, that I've mentioned before, that intellectuals decided to be free, and then workers on the Lech Walesa decided to be free, etc. And being free, yes, they have no fear, there will be some repercussions when they actually sort of come up to the surface and being free. So I just wanted to add that one. It's an interesting experience, but particularly because, again, I come back to the group. We still focus a little bit too much on the individual. And really, in this program of Young Generation Will Change Ukraine, there are no leaders in the group. The term is not used. And yes, one person from the group will actually look after sort of making the budget, how much it will cost to visit the country, and other different people will arrange different visits, etc. And then there is situational leadership. When the group in Sweden meet with Carl Bildt, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, it is of course the person that studied international relations that will take over and chair the discussion, etc. But when they meet with the Deputy Minister of Economics, it is somebody that knows a lot about the economic that does it. So, in other words, leadership can be very much group leadership rather than just individual leadership. And this notion, again, I repeat, situational leadership rather than. So that was, I could stop at that, if you want more time for the discussion. There's some other questions there that I can try to answer too. So that what personal characteristics, or I mentioned moral authority. How do effective leaders such as Gandhi and King require authority and exercise social power for high achievements? Well, it is by articulating some very high goals, but then actually having enough wisdom to choose the right methods, the right ways, like you have mentioned, that he told people, go and produce salt, go and make salt. Now, the ultimate gain, which is very clear, of course, to get independence for India. But, you see, to start with that, it actually would have failed. But go and make salt. He got immediately the fellowship. So then his own authority grew in the process too, because he had that followership. And then he could move to, passive resistance, etc., etc. Well, even with Martin Luther King, when he started in the march, just with a few people, but 20,000 appeared when he was kind of finishing the Great War. So you see, again, the authority of the leader rose in the process, and that means that he had to have some almost immediate success before he starts, which was, and because the next question is about Gorbachev, I think. That's where the Gorbachev turned out not to be effective leader, because what he had in mind was not the disintegration of the Soviet Union, but rather improving the Soviet Union by actually liberating people, so to speak, by pulling out the Communist Party. But you see, so he did not pick, if you like, the right instruments or the right method to do what he wanted to achieve, and therefore he failed because the opposite effect was produced. A pity, because he's rather simpatico, I would call him, since I know him well, I'd call him simpatico. Now, how do leaders influence people and events outside of their own direct sphere of authority? That was the question C. Well, but by enlarging the roots of their authority, that's not their sphere, but somehow, they can acquire some knowledge, they can listen to other people, they can cite, as we often do, maybe too often, that so-and-so said so-and-so or did so-and-so, and that way, even if it is not their sphere of competence, I would say, they can actually exercise some leadership. And, but the last question that was there was, last question was, what changes are needed in the way leaders use social power to promote progress toward a new paradigm? Well, by doing it. So I think we have to articulate what that new paradigm is, disseminate it, etc. And therefore, the most important thing, again, that we should act according to the new paradigm that we are proposing, which means, again, do what you preach and not just preach. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much. My name is Davor Benedict. I'm here by invitation of Mr. Ivo Schlaus. This is my second time with you. I'm a member of Croatian Parliament, so I'm Igor, and I'm very happy to be with you. Thank you very much. I would say that it is tightly connected with leadership also, as you mentioned. The world is changing, and I would put two more things at the agenda. First one is performance management, and the second one is social power and the role of media. Why I'm talking about that? Because long ago, 100 years ago, the stakeholders of power in the world were different than today. The state, labor unions, peasants associations, and everything, it was connected much more with the money influence of these social groups. And today there is a whole bunch of, different social power groups, non-profit organization. In democratic process, we say for them groups for pressure, but it's in a way, also connected with the money or with the influence through the media. What's the good thing that there is no such tightness, such connection between the money as it was before, but it's still in correlation. One of the things that you mentioned, and I think it's the most important for the good spreading of good values in our society, is capacity for stand for its values. So for standing for values of these groups. So it rises with education, of course. It rises with encouraging leadership inside these groups. So encouraging leadership boosts the capability of social groups, to handle and to fight for their issues. But there is always a question of fair distribution of the power. So we have examples of social groups that are very loud. They represent their issues. They fight very strong, and they struggle for their goals, for things that are interested in. But from the other side, we have the groups that are not so encouraged. They are maybe much more important to the world or to society than these loud guys. So how to encourage them in order to get their, space in the media? So with the media, it's always something that is connected with the money. So I think that one of the basic things and the most important things it would be necessary to discuss would be definitely social power and the role of the media, that distribution in one hand. And on another hand, and I would say one good example of supervision, and it is connected with performance management, is the difference or comparison between the United States and the European Union in terms of power. So you have the national United States government, the president. They're under supervision of media and of all kinds of different interest groups, because they are under all the pressure of the media, because the media are national media in the whole 50 states of the United States. On the other hand, you have the European Union, the European Commission, a huge administrative body that has a huge power, but there is no that kind of public supervision because there is no European media that cover that. You have only national media. So that's the difference between supervision of European institutions and American institutions. So what we need to achieve and to boost also, I think so, it's my personal opinion, in society is that performance management or supervision of institutions, together with empowering social groups, in encouraging them to become leaders in their field, but it's tightly connected with the social power and the role of media. That's my personal.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to comment? Yes.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your presentation on social power. I wanted to try and give some of the way I do to cope with what you mentioned, which is there is this dam of social power and how to distribute it. And the question I would like to raise is how to distribute the power from the leader to the follower. How to distribute from the educated to the not educated, the have to the have not. Because I believe that's the essence of your question, or how I understood it. Donato, you mentioned, well, just because it's sustainable. There is an idea of effectiveness, of healthiness, being capable of bringing movements from the leaders to the followers. You mentioned that. So sometimes the lineage you mentioned on the students, Ukrainian students, they are situational leaders. So how to bring movements? And I would like to bring equanimity. The old virtue of temperance, which by the way was one of the four cardinal virtues for the old Greek, so it's justice, courage, wisdom, and so temperance. So very old stuff. So my intervention here is how to bring movements, and some answer would be equanimity. Mr. Nicholas, you were mentioned about happiness. Google a bit, you were saying the word happiness would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. Sadness gives value to happiness, exactly as scarcity gives its value to abundance. For those who have tried not to eat for one day, I can tell you the very minute you eat something, it tastes incredible. So it's the lack, the scarcity that gives its value to abundance. The followers that give their value to the leaders. So there is this duality that at some point of time we have to recognize that whether it's hot or it's cold, it is still temperature. And I believe true leaders, they live in the temperature. Whether it's cold or hot, they know that there is an impermanence in that. So, for me, avidity and aversion, likes and dislikes, this is all the same stuff. So if we want to get rid of power, glory and love, which you mentioned, traditional avidity, or death, suffering and shame, which are traditional aversion, I believe equanimity, temperance, and self-moderation is the true way. And whether we are leaders or not, whether we are have or have not, whether we are educated or not educated, there is this sense of self-moderation, temperance, equanimity that is always at any time accessible. That's what I wanted to add.
Alberto.
In my opinion, it helps to understand the issue of social power, how social power, how power is taken usually in history and different culture and social structure, taken away from people. Just to give an example, even nowadays, there are countries which we are put to death for a religion that you hold your belief, or the simple fact that you are belonging to a minority of sexual orientation. 13 countries put to death homosexual in 1915. To understand how people do not live in reality, people live in their construction of reality, and that's why they have a different culture that, thank God, also culture change in time. And, one thing that characterizes society and culture is the continuous change, that usually too slow for people that would like equal rights for you are a person and then you have, rights like any other person. The fact, though, is that how the structure of society works. It works like anybody is born in a culture and in a social structure, and that is a channel to give or take away power at certain conditions, depending on what the culture considers good and desirable and bad and punishable. Every culture varies incredibly so from time to time. It's interesting to see that Christians were burned into the circus in Rome for being Christian, and then as soon as Constantine became Christianity the religion of state, Christians happily became persecutors of pagans. The point is how we understand that family is a great, laboratory for power structure, and how mother and father interact, is a university of power administration for the kids, and how the fable, and story and cartoons, the issue of power is educated in people, not only by rewards and punishment, but also by narratives. So I think, for example, the feminists, that many years ago, I was in Berkeley in the 60s and 70s, when the first feminists were burning their bra in the street, I was a shy Italian coming, and I didn't understand at the time, I have to confess. But after a while, they were right, because that was a symbol of what a proper woman should be at that time. And so I would say that for organisms like us, would be productive to give, thought that how we're talking so much about a new paradigm in education. What about education as a tremendous carrier of power roles, and why not to consider teaching people, normal citizens, to see the hidden structure of power, because if we are aware how power is created, distributed, and taken away, people will be more aware and maybe more effective than not to get the power taken away from them, not only with arms and violence, but also with subtle, TV commercial and fashion and so forth.
Yes, it was a very interesting point Mr. Ginger mentioned, the intersection of calamities and social power. I myself come from many calamities in that area, nuclear. And nuclear energy is dual use. It's a tremendous power, and it can be a source of destruction. I think we have to
apply this dual use to social power as well. It can be unlimited source of bright things for the future, or if it is channeled the wrong way or exploding the wrong way, it's fatal. So let me refer, and probably later I will speak about that. The First World War. Okay? Both the German Chancellor after the First World War and Churchill, who played not the highest role, but a very significant role in the First World War, were referring to the First World War as something which was practically unstoppable. Okay? The phrase of the German Chancellor was Niagara. It was coming like a Niagara. And Churchill was in his memoirs referring to something like the retribution demanded by the masses and the by the mass teachings was unstoppable. So practically there was a social energy release in a way compounded by the media, compounded by the political power from the 1890s onward, which made the whole situation in the judgment of the leadership unmanageable. So this is dual use. We have to apply to today. Instead of naval arms race, we can speak about any of the arms race. Instead of the genies, I think we might have everyone the same genies: national pride, prestige, dangerous mix of these things, and the way it is channeled will be defining for the months, unfortunately for the months to come, not for the decades to come.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well,
Yeah. Member of the Parliament has raised the issue of media. Now, when you speak media, I don't want to speak about media power, but in different terms, perhaps, yes. When you speak of media, you think immediately of the freedom of speech. I will probably sound like a heretic, but, in contemporary societies, freedom of speech is, of course, almost the highest value in democratic countries, freedom of the speech. But we use this freedom of the speech without any responsibility. No boundaries on that. And let me cite an example. A number of years ago, you all know about that, a Swede published in a Danish paper 12 caricatures of Mohammedan. Now, this was insulting immediately hundreds of millions of Muslims. Insulting and woke sentiment, if you vote, a sentiment of, let's say, of humiliation, but also hate. And it certainly helped quite a bit in, let's say, in the amplification of this extremist movement, Islamist extremist movement. Now, the act was repeated. It was like pouring gasoline on the fire that was already burning by Charlie in Paris. And the reaction was, when Charlie and a few colleagues were killed, tremendous solidarity and full support for the freedom of speech, unlimited. 3 million people in Paris had gathered in manifestation, in other places, in other countries. 40 heads of states of democratic countries came, as a sign of solidarity with Charlie, if you like, with freedom of speech. Now, but it is right. It is right if you think of that, how utterly damaging the abuse that is using it irresponsibly. And we have a lot of that in media. I mean, this is perhaps an extreme example where you can actually demolish a person. You can sometimes demolish a party, a group of people, and at best sometimes, by saying something that is not necessarily right, and at best after that in the paper you might find a little note about we actually misquoted or did something like that. I think it is something that we should put on our agenda, media, the freedom of speech, because this is one of the things, unless we deal with it, how we find that happy medium, preserving the freedom of speech, which is a very, very high value, and yet somehow avoiding extremely damaging effect. Well, this is one of the things that can actually, again, sort of weigh over us. There's danger of clash between civilizations. You see, can be creating a clash of civilization because of, anyway.
That's very interesting. We're going to, okay, we'll just have very quick.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
Exactly, because media has two different roles. In one hand, it's encouraging different social groups, freedom of speech, everything that is connected with that. And the second role is abuse that Mr. Todd just said. It can be for maximizing benefit, and it can be also fatal for the society. So the next point, what I wanted to emphasize is the how to measure, how to encourage different social stakeholders to measure performance. Performance management is something I'm a physicist also. I have the same background as you, but we need what's good and what's bad. How to put that in our agenda.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Quickly, first, I think he agrees perfectly on the point of, I like very much of definition, intersection of calamities. And I was fortunate, as you do, and did I worked for chemical disarmament, and so obviously there are organizations for the liberation of chemical weapons. And one of the characteristics of this kind of weapons disarmament conventions, and that is in case, is working for dual use. I mean, exactly the promotion of positive energy, I mean, the industry, the good industrial use of chemicals, and the destruction of the weapons on the other side. Of course, then the question is, are these conventions really, achieving what we wanted to do? I mean, when they were thought and developed. Well, the fact that one organization is awarded a Nobel Peace Prize probably says something, but it's also a matter of political, opportunities sometimes. So that's not necessarily a measurement of success. There are other measurements of success that we should consider. Quickly on the other point, media, it's, as you said, I mean, there is only one element that distinguishes good media from bad media. It's free media. I mean, if the media is free, so the multiplicity of media instruments and media that we have nowadays, of course, if it is also the media itself, if it's also assessed in terms of quality, because there is also a lot of bad media that is only creating not only confusion, it's distorting information. So if the media are contributing to distorting information, therefore they do not provide a service to the community, to the society, and to the social power that should actually serve other causes, such as social justice, as you mentioned. So this is very important, is to promote free media. I mean, media that does not serve one patron, that is not complacent towards one owner or a group of owners. So this is what I want to say. It's a very important subject that would deserve a specific session.
2 minutes. Thank you. Winston gets the last word.
Sure. I just wanted to stress a few things that maybe didn't come out as clearly as I would have liked. I referred to the South African situation And what I wanted to draw your attention to is the symbolic emotional energy and intelligence, the question of timing, and the critical role of positive sentiment in leadership on the cusp of change. And it seems to me these elements were present in Mandela when he addressed the doc in his trial for his life. And there was a great debate amongst the lawyers because the thought was, if he gave this speech, he would surely get the death sentence. And Brown Fisher was one of his lawyers who was opposed to this. Nevertheless, he persisted. It was his own innate emotional intelligence that insisted on him giving this famous speech, "Why I am prepared to die." And the central reason he was prepared to die was because of the defense of democracy. The regime is going to kill him. They're going to kill him because of democracy, and I think they recoiled from that. But that idea that he was willing to die for democracy was one of the foundation pillars of social action, etc., to the point where they do have the democracy that he envisioned. The second illustration, very briefly, is that roughly the same elements occur in the March on Montgomery, with Martin Luther King, the famous Petway Bridge. And here there was the crucial moment. The state government was quite willing to use unlimited force against the marchers. And when the governor made a mistake of saying, I cannot guarantee the freedom of these people, the timing here was he gave Lyndon Johnson the opportunity to mobilize the National Guard to go in there and keep the peace. The march did take place, and from then on, segregation was on a downhill swing. But there again, the march was approached with positive sentiment, not with hate, not with negative symbols of freedom and so on. And just one last point, media. There is a problem with the media, sadly. In the US, we have something called Fox News, which is sort of the broadcast arm of the Republican right wing. And Adelson, the multi-billionaire, owns the largest newspaper in Israel, which broadcasts for the political platform of the Likud and is available free to every Israeli citizen.
Okay. Thank you very much.